I walked into my house in Scottsdale, Arizona, after 3 months working overseas in Singapore, expecting dust and stale air. But instead, I found fresh coffee brewing in my kitchen and someone's yoga mat rolled up in my living room corner. My suitcase hit the floor with a thud that echoed through what should have been an empty house. And that's when I heard footsteps upstairs in my bedroom. My name is Nathan Keller, and I'm a civil engineer who spends half the year managing projects in Southeast Asia. I'd left my 3-bedroom ranch house vacant while I was gone, specifically telling my neighbors I'd be away and asking them to keep an eye on the place. What I didn't expect was to return home and find someone actually living in it. "Hello," I called out, my heart pounding. "Who's in my house?" A woman appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in my bathrobe, her blonde hair up in a towel. She looked to be in her mid-50s, and instead of looking startled or embarrassed, she looked furious. "Excuse me, but who are you and how did you get in here?" she demanded, gripping the banister like she owned it. I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "I live here. This is my house. Who the hell are you?" "I'm Brenda Patterson, the HOA president of Sonoran Heights," she said, her voice dripping with indignation. "And I'm currently occupying this property under HOA Bylaws Section 7.3, which states that abandoned properties can be temporarily managed by the association to maintain community standards." I felt my blood pressure spike. "Abandoned? I've been gone 3 months for work. I paid my HOA dues before I left. This house isn't abandoned." Brenda descended the stairs, tightening my bathrobe around herself. 3 months with no communication, no response to HOA notices, and numerous violations that went unaddressed. "Your grass was overgrown, your mailbox was full, and there was a broken shutter that was an absolute eyesore. The HOA board voted to take temporary possession until the issues were resolved." "Take temporary possession," I repeated, barely able to process what I was hearing. "You can't just move into someone's house because their grass got long. Actually, if you'd read your HOA agreement, you'd know that we absolutely can," Brenda said, walking into my kitchen and pouring herself a cup of coffee from my coffee maker. "I've been living here for 6 weeks now, making sure the property is maintained properly. You should be thanking me." I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking with anger. "Get out. Get out of my house right now or I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Brenda said calmly, sipping the coffee. "I have all the documentation. The HOA has every right to be here." I dialed 911, and within 20 minutes, 2 Scottsdale police officers arrived at my door. Officer Martinez was a tall Hispanic man with a no-nonsense expression, and Officer Chen was a younger Asian woman who looked like she'd seen every kind of crazy during her time on the force. "Sir, can you explain the situation?" Officer Martinez asked me. "This is my house. I own it. I've been overseas for work, and I came home to find this woman living here. She says the HOA gave her permission, but that's insane. You can't just move into someone's house." Brenda appeared behind me, now dressed in clothes I didn't recognize, holding a folder stuffed with papers. "Officers, I'm Brenda Patterson, president of the Sonoran Heights HOA. This property was deemed abandoned after the owner failed to respond to multiple notices and violated several community standards. The HOA board voted to take temporary management of the property, and I volunteered to stay here to ensure it was properly maintained." Officer Chen took the folder from Brenda and started flipping through it. "Mr. Keller, do you have proof of ownership?" "Of course I do," I said, pulling out my wallet and showing them my driver's license with this address. "I bought this house 4 years ago. I have the deed, the mortgage statements, everything." Officer Martinez looked at Brenda. "Madam, Even if the HOA has concerns about property maintenance, you can't just move into someone's home without their permission. That's trespassing at minimum, possibly breaking and entering. I didn't break in, Brenda said defensively. I used the master key that the HOA has on file for emergencies. The HOA has a key to my house, I said, feeling violated all over again. It's in your HOA agreement, Brenda said. All homeowners must provide a key to the HOA office for emergency access. Officer Chen looked at me. Did you sign an HOA agreement when you purchased the property? Yes, but I never gave them a key, I said. The previous owners must have. Officer Martinez looked at the papers Brenda had provided. These are notices about grass height, a broken shutter, and paint that's supposedly fading. These aren't emergencies that would justify entering someone's home, let alone living in it. The property was abandoned, Brenda insisted. 3 months is not legally abandoned, Officer Chen said. Sir, is your mortgage current? Yes, I said. I have automatic payments set up. I paid my HOA dues before I left too. I can show you the bank records. Brenda's confident expression started to crack slightly. Well, he didn't respond to any of our notices. Madam, where were you sending these notices? Officer Martinez asked. To this address, of course, Brenda said. So you were sending notices to a house that you thought was abandoned, and then using the fact that he didn't respond to notices you knew he wouldn't receive as justification for calling it abandoned. Officer Chen said, her tone making it clear how ridiculous that sounded. I pulled out my phone and logged into my email. I have mail forwarding set up. Everything goes to my email. I never received any notices from the HOA. We send physical mail only, Brenda said. So you knew I was away and wouldn't get them, I said. Officer Martinez looked at Brenda with a stern expression. Madam, I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and leave this property immediately. What you've done here is illegal. This is outrageous, Brenda sputtered. I'm going to call my lawyer. You do that, Officer Chen said. But you need to leave now. You have 30 minutes to pack your things and vacate the premises or we'll arrest you for trespassing. Brenda's face turned red. You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. I have authority here. You have authority over common areas and architectural standards, not over breaking into people's homes and living in them, Officer Martinez said. 30 minutes, madam. I watched as Brenda stormed upstairs, and I followed her with Officer Chen to make sure she didn't damage anything or take anything that wasn't hers. She had moved into my master bedroom, and I could see she'd made herself completely at home. Her clothes were in my closet, her toiletries were in my bathroom, and she'd even rearranged my furniture. How did you think this was okay? I asked her as she started throwing clothes into a suitcase. This neighborhood has standards, Brenda snapped. People like you who just leave their properties to rot bring down everyone's home values. The HOA exists to prevent that. My grass got long, I said. That's it. That doesn't give you the right to move in. There was also the shutter and the paint, she said. What shutter? What paint? Brenda pointed vaguely toward the window. One of your shutters was loose, and the paint on your mailbox post was fading. I looked at Officer Chen in disbelief. She moved into my house because my mailbox post paint was fading. Madam, you need to hurry, Officer Chen said to Brenda. You have 20 minutes left. As Brenda packed, I walked through my house with Officer Martinez, documenting everything. She'd been living here like it was her own place. There were groceries in my fridge, her laptop set up at my dining room table, her books on my shelves. In the garage, I found that she'd even parked her silver Lexus SUV next to my covered truck. I want to press charges, I told Officer Martinez. You have every right to, he said. This is clear-cut trespassing and potentially breaking and entering depending on how she got the key. I'd also recommend getting a lawyer because this sounds like an HOA that's way overstepped its bounds. Brenda came downstairs with 2 suitcases and a hateful expression. You're going to regret this, Nathan. The HOA has rules and you're going to follow them, or we'll make your life miserable. Is that a threat, madam? Officer Martinez asked. It's a promise, Brenda said. He can't just ignore HOA regulations. And you can't just move into people's houses, Officer Chen said. Let's go. They escorted Brenda out to her Lexus, and I watched from my doorway as she loaded her belongings and drove away, shooting me a venomous look as she passed. The officers stayed for another hour, taking my full statement and photographing the evidence of Brenda's occupation. They gave me a case number and the contact information for the detective who would be handling the case. After they left, I walked through my house in a daze. Everything felt violated. She'd slept in my bed, used my shower, cooked in my kitchen. I started making a list of everything I'd need to replace or deep clean. Then I sat down at my dining room table and started going through the HOA documents I'd signed when I bought the house. The agreement was 60 pages of dense legal language, but I read every word. There was indeed a clause about property maintenance, and another about abandoned properties, but the definition of abandoned was clear. A property was only considered abandoned if it was vacant for more than 6 months with no mortgage or utility payments, or if the owner could not be located. Neither applied to me. I'd been gone 3 months, all my bills were current, and I'd told my neighbors I'd be away for work. There was also a clause about the HOA having emergency access, but the examples given were things like fire, flood, or gas leak, not cosmetic issues like grass height or paint. And nowhere in the agreement did it say the HOA could move into your house and live there. I called my neighbor Tom, who lived 3 doors down. He was a retired accountant who'd always been friendly. "Nathan, you're back," he said when he answered. "How was Singapore?" "It was fine until I got home and found the HOA president living in my house," I said. There was a long pause. "What?" I explained the whole situation, and Tom let out a low whistle. "Brenda's been getting worse and worse. She fined me $500 last month because my house number wasn't the right shade of bronze, but moving into your house, that's insane even for her." "Did you know she was doing it?" I asked. "No," Tom said. "I saw her car in your driveway a few times, but I figured she was checking on the place like she said the HOA would. She told everyone at the last meeting that your house was abandoned and that the HOA was managing it until they could locate you." "I wasn't lost. I was working. Did anyone try to contact me?" "Brenda said she'd tried everything and couldn't reach you," Tom said. "She made it sound like you'd just vanished and left the house behind." I felt sick. She was lying. She never tried to contact me except by sending mail to a house she knew I wasn't living in. "You need to go to the next HOA board meeting," Tom said. "It's next Tuesday at 7. A lot of people are fed up with Brenda, but she's got 2 other board members who always vote with her. Maybe if people hear what she did, they'll finally vote her out." I thanked Tom and hung up. Then I called a locksmith. I didn't care what the HOA agreement said about emergency access. I was changing my locks, and they weren't getting a copy. The locksmith came out that same evening and changed all the locks, including the one on my garage. It cost me $400, but it was worth every penny for the peace of mind. Over the next few days, I deep cleaned my entire house, trying to erase any trace of Brenda's presence. I threw out my sheets and towels, scrubbed every surface, and even had a cleaning service come in to do a thorough job. I also installed a security system with cameras covering every entrance to my house and the front yard. On Monday, I met with a lawyer named Jennifer Stokes who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in Old Town Scottsdale, in a building that looked like an old Spanish mission. She was in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for taking on overreaching HOAs. "I've heard of Brenda Patterson," Jennifer said after I'd explained everything. "She's got a reputation in the HOA attorney community. This is the third neighborhood where she's been president, and she always ends up in legal trouble. But this is by far the worst thing I've heard of her doing." "Can we sue her and the HOA?" I asked. "Absolutely," Jennifer said. "You've got a clear case for trespassing, illegal eviction, emotional distress, and violation of your property rights. The fact that she was living there for 6 weeks is egregious. I'd also recommend filing a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs in the state. What she did is almost certainly a violation of state HOA law." "The police took a report," I said. "Is that going to lead to criminal charges?" "It should," Jennifer said. "Trespassing is a crime, and depending on how the prosecutor sees it, they might charge her with burglary as well, since she entered with intent to occupy the property. The fact that she used a key doesn't matter. She didn't have legal authority to be there." Jennifer agreed to take my case, and we started preparing a lawsuit against both Brenda personally and the Sonoran Heights HOA. She also helped me draft a formal complaint to the Arizona Department of Real Estate detailing Brenda's actions and the HOA board's role in authorizing her to take over my property. Tuesday evening came, and I drove to the community center where the HOA meetings were held. It was a small building near the neighborhood entrance, with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people. When I arrived at 6:45, there were already about 30 homeowners there, which Tom told me was way more than usual. "Word got around about what happened to you," Tom whispered as I sat down next to him. "People are angry." Brenda was at the front of the room with 2 other board members. A man named Gary Winters, who was maybe 60 with a gray beard, and a woman named Susan Clarkson, who looked like she was in her late 60s with perfectly styled white hair. They were sitting behind a long table with stacks of papers in front of them. At 7 o'clock sharp, Brenda banged a gavel on the table. "This meeting of the Sonoran Heights HOA board is now in session. We'll start with the minutes from the last meeting, then move on to treasurer's report, and then, point of order," I said, standing up. Brenda's face tightened when she saw me. "You're not recognized. Please sit down." "I'm a homeowner in this community and I have a right to speak," I said. "There's a time for homeowner comments at the end of the meeting," Brenda said. "Please sit down or I'll have you removed." "Removed by who?" I asked. "Are you going to call the sheriff? Because I already have his office on speed dial after you illegally moved into my house." The room erupted in murmurs. Several people turned to look at Brenda, whose face had gone from tight to bright red. "That was a legitimate HOA action," Brenda said. "Your property was abandoned." "I was away for work for 3 months," I said. "All my bills were current." "You never tried to contact me. You just decided my house was yours and moved in like some kind of squatter." Gary leaned over and whispered something to Brenda, but she waved him off. "Your property was in violation of multiple HOA standards," Brenda said. "The board voted to take temporary management." "Did the board vote for you to live there?" Tom called out. "Because that's not management, that's theft." More murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "I'd like to see the minutes from that board meeting," another homeowner said. "The one where you voted to take over Nathan's house." Brenda shuffled through her papers. "We don't have to share executive session minutes." "Yes, you do," said a woman I didn't know in the front row. Arizona HOA law requires all board meetings to be open to homeowners except for specific legal matters. Was this discussed in executive session? It was a legal matter, Brenda said. No, it wasn't, I said. It was you deciding you wanted to live in my house rent-free. This is out of order, Brenda said, banging the gavel again. We're moving on to the treasurer's report. I want to make a motion to remove Brenda Patterson as HOA president, Tom said, standing up. And I want to call for a vote of no confidence in the current board. You can't do that, Susan said, speaking for the first time. Actually, according to the HOA bylaws, any homeowner can make a motion at a board meeting, and if 20% of homeowners present second it, it has to be voted on, Tom said. He'd clearly done his homework. Hands shot up all over the room. I counted quickly at least 10 people had their hands up, which was way more than 20% of the people there. Fine, Brenda said icily. We'll take a vote at the end of the meeting. But the meeting never got that far. About 15 minutes into Brenda's attempt to go through the treasurer's report, which consisted of her explaining why the HOA needed to raise dues again to pay for new landscaping at the entrance, the door opened and 2 sheriff's deputies walked in. Brenda Patterson, one of them said. Brenda looked up and I saw fear flash across her face for the first time. Yes, Madam, we have a warrant for your arrest. Please stand up and put your hands behind your back. The room went completely silent. Brenda stood slowly, her face pale. What's the charge? Criminal trespassing and burglary in the 2nd degree, the deputy said, pulling out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. As they cuffed her and led her out, Brenda shot me a look of pure hatred. This is your fault, she hissed. No, madam, the deputy said. This is your fault for breaking into someone's house and living there. After they took Brenda away, the meeting dissolved into chaos. Gary and Susan tried to restore order, but people were shouting questions at them. Did they know what Brenda was doing? Had they authorized it? What else had the board been doing without telling the homeowners? Eventually, Gary held up his hands. Look, we didn't know Brenda was living in Nathan's house. She told us she was just checking on it and handling the maintenance violations. If we'd known she'd moved in, we never would have approved it. But you did approve taking over his house, someone asked. We approved sending notices and, if necessary, hiring contractors to fix the violations and putting a lien on the property for the costs, Gary said. That's standard procedure. We didn't approve anyone moving in. I want to see those meeting minutes, Tom said again. Susan pulled out a folder and started passing around photocopies. I grabbed one and read through it. The board meeting had been held 2 months ago, just a month after I'd left for Singapore. The minutes showed that Brenda had presented my property as having multiple violations and being unresponsive to notices. The board had voted to authorize the HOA to fix the violations and place a lien on the property for the costs, not to exceed $5,000. There was nothing in the minutes about anyone living there or taking possession of the property. So Brenda lied to us too, Gary said, looking at the minutes. She told us she had authority to manage the property, but what she really meant was she was moving in. The HOA is still liable, Jennifer said. I'd asked her to come to the meeting with me, and she was sitting in the back row. You gave her access to the property and the authority to enter it. Even if you didn't specifically authorize her to live there, the HOA created the situation that allowed it to happen. Gary's face fell. Are you a lawyer? I am, Jennifer said. And I'm representing Nathan in a lawsuit against Brenda Patterson and the Sonoran Heights HOA for what happened. The meeting ended shortly after that. Gary and Susan said they needed to consult with the HOA's attorney before they could answer any more questions. Tom called for the vote of no confidence, and it passed unanimously among the homeowners present. Gary and Susan both resigned on the spot, saying they didn't want to deal with the legal mess that was coming. Over the next few weeks, I watched as the case against Brenda moved forward. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office charged her with criminal trespassing and burglary in the second degree, which was a felony because she'd entered the house with intent to commit theft of services by living there rent-free. Her lawyer tried to argue that she'd had permission from the HOA, but the meeting minutes contradicted that, and Gary and Susan both gave statements saying they'd never authorized her to live there. Meanwhile, Jennifer filed our civil lawsuit. We were suing Brenda for damages including emotional distress, the cost of replacing my belongings that she'd used, the cost of the deep cleaning and security system, and punitive damages for the outrageousness of her actions. We were also suing the HOA for negligence and violation of my property rights. The HOA's insurance company got involved quickly. Their lawyer called Jennifer and made it clear that they thought the HOA was going to lose and they wanted to settle. Jennifer negotiated hard, and within 6 weeks, we had a settlement offer of $75,000 from the HOA's insurance, plus an agreement that the HOA would revise its bylaws to prevent anything like this from happening again, and that all locks would be changed on my property at their expense with no requirement that I provide them with a key. I accepted the settlement. The money wasn't really the point, but it felt like vindication. The HOA had screwed up badly and they were paying for it. Brenda's criminal case took longer. Her lawyer tried to get the charges reduced, but the prosecutor wasn't having it. The case went to trial in October, about 5 months after I'd come home to find her in my house. I testified, as did the police officers who'd responded that day. Jennifer had also helped me document everything, including the state of my house when I'd returned and the items I'd had to replace. The jury took less than 3 hours to find Brenda guilty of both charges. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in county jail, though she'd be eligible for parole after serving a third of that. He also ordered her to pay restitution for my expenses that weren't covered by the HOA settlement, which came to about $12,000. "Miss Patterson," the judge said at sentencing, "what you did was one of the most brazen cases of trespassing I've seen in my career. You used your position of authority in the HOA to violate Mr. Keller's rights and his privacy in the most fundamental way possible. You moved into his home and acted as if it were yours. This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated, and I hope this sentence sends a message to other HOA board members that their authority has limits, and those limits are the law." Brenda stood there stone-faced as the bailiff led her away. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that it was over, and sadness that it had come to this in the first place. All of this could have been avoided if she just followed the rules and respected people's property rights. The Sonoran Heights HOA went through a major reorganization after everything came out. 3 new board members were elected, including Tom, who became the new president. One of their first acts was to hire a professional management company to handle the day-to-day operations of the HOA, taking that responsibility away from volunteer homeowners who might not understand the legal limits of their authority. They also revised the bylaws extensively. The new rules made it clear that the HOA's authority was limited to common areas and architectural standards, and that any action involving a homeowner's private property required written notice to the homeowner with at least 30 days to respond, and had to be done through licensed contractors, not board members. The emergency access provision was clarified to mean only actual emergencies like fire or flood, and any use of emergency access had to be documented and reported to the full board within 24 hours. Tom called me a few months after Brenda's sentencing. "I thought you should know," he said. "We did some digging into the HOA's finances, and we found out Brenda had been using HOA funds for personal expenses. Not huge amounts, but over the 3 years she was president, she'd taken about $15,000 for things like dinners, spa days, and even a vacation to San Diego that she claimed was for an HOA conference that didn't exist." "Seriously?" I said. "Yeah. We've reported it to the police, and they're adding embezzlement charges to her case. It might mean more jail time." I shook my head. She really thought she could just do whatever she wanted. "That's what happens when someone gets a little bit of power and no oversight," Tom said. "But we're fixing that. The new management company does regular audits, and all expenses over $100 have to be approved by at least 2 board members now. We're trying to make sure this never happens again." I appreciated that. It didn't undo what Brenda had done to me, but it meant other homeowners wouldn't have to go through the same thing. As for me, I eventually got my house feeling like home again. It took time, and I had to replace more than I'd expected, but eventually the violation faded. I even ended up getting a dog, a German Shepherd named Scout, who became my early warning system for anyone coming near the property. Between Scout and my security cameras, I felt safe again. I also became more active in the HOA, attending meetings regularly and making sure the new board stayed accountable. I'd learned the hard way that you can't just ignore your HOA and hope they'll leave you alone. You have to be involved, ask questions, and make sure they're following the rules. The civil lawsuit against Brenda personally was harder to collect on. She didn't have a lot of assets, and after the criminal restitution and the legal fees from her criminal case, she was essentially broke. Jennifer put a judgment lien on a condo she owned in Phoenix, which meant we'd get paid if she ever sold it, but I wasn't holding my breath. The HOA settlement had covered most of my actual expenses anyway, so I wasn't hurting financially. What bothered me more was the psychological impact. For months after coming home to find Brenda in my house, I had trouble sleeping. I kept having nightmares about coming home and finding strangers in my house, or about being locked out of my own home. I eventually started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma, and that helped a lot. She helped me work through the feelings of violation and betrayal, and taught me strategies for managing the anxiety. One thing that really helped was talking to other people who'd had problems with Brenda. After the trial, several other homeowners in Sonoran Heights reached out to me with their own stories. One couple had been fined $10,000 for painting their front door a shade of red that Brenda claimed wasn't approved, even though it was the exact color listed in the HOA guidelines. Another homeowner had been threatened with foreclosure because she was 3 days late paying her HOA dues 1 month due to being in the hospital. We formed an informal support group, and it felt good to know I wasn't alone. We shared strategies for dealing with HOA issues, recommended lawyers to each other, and just generally supported each other through the stress of living in an HOA community. I also started advocating for HOA reform at the state level. I reached out to my state representative and shared my story, and she was horrified. She introduced a bill that would strengthen homeowner protections against overreaching HOAs, including requiring all HOA board members to take training on Arizona HOA law before they could serve, and creating a state office where homeowners could file complaints about HOA abuses. The bill faced opposition from the lobbying group that represented HOAs across the state, but my representative kept pushing. She invited me to testify before a state legislative committee, and I told my story to a room full of lawmakers. I also brought Tom, who testified about the financial mismanagement we'd discovered, and Jennifer, who testified about the legal issues she'd seen in her practice representing homeowners against HOAs. The bill didn't pass that first year, but it got more attention than anyone expected. Local news stations picked up the story, and I did several interviews about what had happened to me. The headline, "HOA President Arrested for Living in Homeowner's House," made for compelling television, and it sparked a broader conversation about HOA power and accountability. One interview I did was with a local investigative reporter named Sarah Kim, who was doing a series on HOA abuses in Arizona. She interviewed me, several other homeowners with horror stories, and even got some of the state legislators on camera talking about the need for reform. Her series aired over 5 nights and won a regional Emmy. More importantly, it put pressure on the legislature to do something. The next year, a revised version of the HOA reform bill passed both chambers of the legislature and was signed by the governor. It wasn't everything we'd hoped for, but it was progress. The new law required HOA board members to complete 4 hours of training on Arizona HOA law before taking office, created stricter rules about HOA access to private property, and established a state ombudsman's office where homeowners could file complaints. The ombudsman had the power to investigate complaints and impose fines on HOAs that violated the law. My state representative invited me to the bill's signing ceremony, and I stood behind the governor as she signed it into law. It felt surreal to think that my nightmare experience had led to real change that would protect other homeowners across the state, but the impact went beyond just the law. My story got picked up by national media, and I ended up doing interviews with several major news outlets about HOA overreach. I heard from people all over the country who'd had their own nightmares with HOAs, and many of them said my story had inspired them to fight back or get involved in reforming their own HOA rules. I also heard from HOA board members who said my story had been a wake-up call for them about the importance of following the rules and respecting homeowners' rights. Several HOAs reached out to Jennifer asking her to review their bylaws and procedures to make sure they weren't at risk of the kind of liability that Sonoran Heights had faced. She ended up building a whole practice area around HOA compliance and reform. As for Brenda, she served 8 months in county jail before being released on parole. The embezzlement charges Tom had mentioned ended up being added to her case, and she pleaded guilty in exchange for the embezzlement sentence running concurrent with her trespassing sentence, so she didn't get additional jail time. But she did lose her parole hearing initially because she showed no remorse, insisting in her hearing that she'd been trying to help the neighborhood and that I was the villain for not maintaining my property. The parole board wasn't impressed, and they denied her parole. She ended up serving the full 2/3 of her sentence before being released, about 16 months total. When she got out, she moved out of state. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Nevada and was living with her sister. Good riddance. The condo she owned in Phoenix eventually sold, and I got my $12,000 in restitution plus interest. By that point, it was more about the principle than the money. I donated half of it to a nonprofit that helped homeowners fight HOA abuse, and used the other half to fund a scholarship for law students interested in property rights and HOA law. My life gradually returned to normal, or at least a new normal. I continued working overseas for part of the year, but I made sure to stay in better touch with my neighbors and the HOA board when I was gone. I set up a system where my mail was forwarded to me electronically, and I gave Tom permission to handle any urgent issues with my property while I was away. I also hired a local property management company to do regular maintenance on my house, including lawn care and any needed repairs, so there'd never be an excuse for the HOA to claim my property was in violation. The new HOA board was night and day compared to Brenda's regime. Tom and the other new board members focused on the basics: maintaining common areas, enforcing reasonable standards, and communicating clearly with homeowners. They sent out a monthly newsletter with updates on HOA business, and they posted all board meeting minutes and financial reports on a website where any homeowner could access them. Transparency became the watchword, and it made a huge difference in how homeowners viewed the HOA. They also revised the violation process to be much more fair and reasonable. Instead of immediately issuing fines, the new process was to send a friendly notice pointing out the issue and giving the homeowner 30 days to address it. If the issue wasn't resolved, a board member would reach out personally to discuss it and see if there were any obstacles to compliance. Only after that would fines be considered, and even then, they started small and escalated gradually. The goal was to achieve compliance, not to punish people. The change in culture was remarkable. Homeowners who'd been at war with the HOA under Brenda's leadership became cooperative and engaged. People started volunteering for committees and helping with neighborhood events. The community actually started feeling like a community instead of a battleground. I got to know a lot of my neighbors better through all of this. The shared experience of dealing with Brenda's tyranny had brought people together, and even after she was gone, we stayed connected. We started having regular neighborhood barbecues and holiday parties. I became friends with several families on my street, including a young couple with 2 kids who lived across from me, and a retired couple next door who'd lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. One thing I realized through all of this was how important it is to know your rights as a homeowner. So many people sign HOA agreements without reading them, or they read them but don't understand what they really mean. I started hosting informal workshops at my house, where I'd invite an attorney to come talk about HOA law and homeowner rights. Jennifer came to the first few, and then she connected me with other attorneys who specialized in this area. We'd have 20 or 30 people show up, and it was clear there was a real hunger for this information. These workshops covered basics like how to read and understand your HOA governing documents, what kinds of restrictions are legal and which aren't, how to handle disputes with your HOA, and when to involve a lawyer. We also talked about how to be an effective HOA board member if you decide to get involved, including the legal duties and potential liability that come with that role. The workshops were so popular that Tom asked if we could make them an official HOA program. We started doing them quarterly, and they became one of the most well-attended HOA events. It turned out a lot of people had questions and concerns, but hadn't had a safe place to ask them. Creating that space made a real difference. I also started writing about my experience. I created a blog where I detailed what had happened to me and provided resources for other homeowners dealing with HOA issues. The blog got a surprising amount of traffic, and I started getting emails from people all over the country asking for advice. I couldn't give legal advice since I wasn't a lawyer, but I could share my experience and point people toward resources that might help. Some of the stories people shared with me were heartbreaking. One elderly woman in Florida wrote that her HOA was trying to foreclose on her house over less than $1,000 in unpaid fines for violations she didn't even know about. A veteran in California told me his HOA had fined him for displaying an American flag, which is actually illegal under federal law. A single mother in Texas was being harassed by her HOA president, who kept finding violations that didn't exist as retaliation for her filing a complaint about his behavior. I connected these people with attorneys in their states who could help, and I shared their stories on my blog with their permission. The blog became a clearinghouse of information about HOA issues, and it seemed to be making a difference. Several people wrote back to tell me that the resources I'd shared had helped them resolve their situations. One of the most rewarding aspects of all of this was seeing real change happen. The legislative reforms in Arizona inspired similar efforts in other states. I was invited to speak at advocacy events in California, Texas, and Florida, sharing my story and talking about the need for HOA reform. Some of those states passed their own reform bills, strengthening protections for homeowners and increasing oversight of HOAs. I also saw change at the local level in Sonoran Heights. The neighborhood that had been defined by Brenda's tyranny transformed into a genuinely pleasant place to live. Property values actually went up after she left, not down as she'd always warned they would if standards weren't rigidly enforced. It turned out that people valued living in a community where they were treated with respect more than they valued perfectly uniform mailbox paint colors. The experience changed me too. I became more civically engaged, not just in the HOA but in local politics generally. I started attending city council meetings and voting in every election, even the small local ones that I used to ignore. I realized that so much of what affects our daily lives happens at the local level, and if you're not paying attention and participating, you're letting other people make decisions for you. Sometimes those other people are reasonable and well-meaning, but sometimes they're like Brenda, and by the time you notice, they've already done damage. I also became more cautious about HOAs in general. When I eventually decided to buy a second property as an investment, I specifically looked for something that wasn't in an HOA. I'd had enough of HOAs for one lifetime. But I also recognized that HOAs aren't inherently bad. They just need proper oversight and board members who understand that they're serving the community, not ruling over it. Looking back on everything that happened, from walking into my house that day to find Brenda in my bathrobe, to watching her get arrested, to testifying at her trial, to speaking before the state legislature, to seeing real reform happen, it felt like a strange journey. I never asked for any of it. I just wanted to come home after working overseas and find my house the way I'd left it. But since it happened, I tried to make something positive out of it. I helped change laws that will protect thousands of homeowners. I helped transform my HOA from a source of stress into an actual community. I helped educate people about their rights, and I held someone accountable who thought she was above the law. The legal expenses were significant, even with the settlements. Between attorney fees, court costs, and the money I spent on security systems and cleaning, I probably spent close to $30,000, even after the settlements. But it was worth it for the principle of the thing and for the changes that resulted. Jennifer told me that my case became famous in HOA law circles. It's used as a teaching example in law schools and in training for HOA board members about what not to do. She said it's probably the most extreme case of HOA overreach she's ever seen, and she's seen a lot. These days, life is good. I still travel for work, but I'm never anxious about leaving my house anymore. Tom keeps an eye on things. I have my security cameras, and Scout is better than any alarm system. The HOA is well run and reasonable, and my neighbors are friends. I still get messages from people dealing with HOA problems, and I try to help where I can. Sometimes I think about writing a book about the whole experience, but I'm not sure I want to relive it all in that much detail. The blog feels like enough. What I want people to take away from my story is this: know your rights, read your HOA documents, stay involved in your community, and don't be afraid to stand up when someone oversteps. What Brenda did to me was extreme, but smaller versions of HOA overreach happen every day across the country. HOAs fine people for trivial violations, restrict harmless activities, and sometimes abuse their power in ways that make homeowners' lives miserable. But homeowners have rights too, and there are laws that protect you. If your HOA is violating those laws, don't be afraid to fight back. Get a lawyer if you need one. File complaints with your state's regulatory agencies. Go to board meetings and ask tough questions. Run for the board yourself if you think you can do better. And if your HOA president ever tries to move into your house, call the sheriff and have them removed. Don't wait, don't negotiate, just call the authorities. What Brenda did was illegal, full stop, and no HOA bylaw or authority supersedes the law. I never imagined that coming home from a work trip would turn into this whole saga, but I'm glad I fought. I'm glad I didn't just accept what Brenda did and move on. I'm glad I held her accountable and pushed for changes that will help other people. It was exhausting and stressful and sometimes scary, but it was worth it. And every time I come home now, whether from a trip overseas or just from running errands, I appreciate walking into my house knowing that it's truly mine, that no one has the right to be there without my permission, and that I'm safe in my own home. That's something I'll never take for granted again.